We gathered here because we want to talk about urbanities, its history, concept, and uses. In the last years, members of the research group Religion and Urbanity have observed a great diversity of urban lives in Europe, the Mediterranean and South Asia, from ancient to modern times, both on a material level and on a level of subjective experience. We have noted the amplitude of factors contributing to the shaping of the urban, its changes and perceptions. We have learned to differentiate between actors and audiences, between individuals and groups, and we observed the different ways of religious groups adapted themselves to the urban space and helped shaping it. However, beyond this diversity, what is the result of our joint research? We will try to give some answers to this in the first part. This will be almost like a revue in the early 20th century Paris. The only difference is that there won't be dancers moving on the stage, but rather some terms and perspectives of analysis, which, by the way, can also be found in the glossary of the conference cloud. We have called this panel retrospectives, but it could just as well be called review. In any case, it is meant to be a critical look back so that we can start well into the second phase of the project. So, what did we do in the last 4 years? The easiest way is to start with numbers. Since autumn 2018, we have held 5 annual conferences, including this one, and 7 workshops. Among them were some that had to be postponed or moved on to online mode due to COVID restrictions. We have had around 50 international fellows so far and have already selected 10 new candidates for the next year. 6 associated researchers who cannot always be on site work with us. We have paid close attention to having gender-balanced cohorts of fellows and conference participants. 11 members of the editorial board of Religion and Urbanity Online ensure the scientific quality of our central publication platform. The individual publications now number in the hundreds, but at least a brief mention should be made here of the books and journal issues already published. And of course, we would like to refer to our open access platform, Religion and Urbanity Online, which since last year is also a journal with an official ISSN. We have promised a total of 200 contributions by the end of the project. And to get there, we still have to make some efforts, but hopefully we will also make a big step forward with this conference. By no means should we forget to mention that we successfully passed the DFG's evaluation during the last winter term. Last but not least, it rained a few academic prizes for books, but also a prize for internationalization awarded by the university. In the individual projects, as well as in joint events, we have already examined many cities in greater detail. We have paid particular attention to the different configurations and reciprocal formations of religion and the urban. All of this is so rich that it can hardly be summarized. But that is precisely why it was so important to do some steering of the overall project. That's why we kept reminding people of the project's guiding ideas, and this is also a substantial result of the first project phase, developed a methodology and a set of tools with which to conduct the individual studies. A selection of these terms will be presented here in a moment, and the rest can be found in the glossary.
Before we get into that, let me start with the concept of urbanity. We have chosen a minimal definition to keep it transculturally open. Not a normative concept, it is regionally different and changing over time. The conceptual core is a kind of lowest common denominator, not an immutable substance, but something constructed, produced and negotiated by agents. It's both a historical concept that is culturally determined and needing to be ever new contextualized, and a concept of a cognitive form that helps us to better understand the spatial configurations and transformations of the city in which religion represents one essential factor. We follow definitions by Georg Simmel, Max Weber's Stadtgemeinde and Gemeindeverfassung, and especially Louis Wirth, who coined the phrase urbanism as a way of life, de facto understanding it rather as urbanity in our sense. We have supplemented these definitions with the work of Henri Lefebvre and other approaches that allow us to consider spatiality and temporality as social constructions, and that is certainly key. We are quite aware that we need to argue strongly for our urbanity instead of urbanism when we are addressing an English-speaking audience, but we think that this is a worthwhile endeavor, and this conference is an important part in this. Urbanity and urban ways of life are thus also spatially reflected, whether in ephemeral, fluid, imaginary, institutional, or architectural ways, that is, in stone, a theme of this year's summer course conducted in Budapest and Prague. It is interesting to observe how the different perspectives have complemented, partially also contradicted each other, and how urbanity changes like in a kaleidoscope when we look into it and turn it. As researchers working historically, we also know that we should not simply project social science theories and definitions onto the past, and that we should not simply transfer European definitions to other regions of the world. We therefore take the self-interpretations of the respective epochs and regions very seriously by also looking at their vocabulary and language, their practices, visions, and perceptions. Our special focus, not least to narrow down the object of research, is on religion, an aspect that has so far remained understudied in urban studies as a whole, when it was not exactly about the Reformation, for instance, in European urban studies. The diverse ways of looking at things that continue to be possible are also reflected in this conference when it comes to urban planning and architecture, superimposition, temporal aspects, staging, rituals, or the perspective of marginalized groups. So let us briefly look at the itinerary for the next 3 days. As you know from the concept note, this conference is divided into 3 parts. The first part today, retrospectives, we have already mentioned just now. The second part will take place tomorrow morning and has a special character too. We have called it the Author's Workshop. It will take place in the form of a World Café. It summarizes preliminary discussions on cities and urbanities as they were engaged during the preparatory workshops in the summer term, typologizing cities and metamorphoses of urbanities. And again, I thank all of you who have been present and engaging in these events. 4 co- or multi-authored papers have found their way here and primarily address questions of comparing cities and of criteria with which urbanity and its change can be grasped. The papers are almost ready for submission, but before that they can still and certainly will benefit from all our criticisms and suggestions. So treat them better as drafts so that you free your imagination and critical tongue. That is why there will be several discussion rounds, and for all this you can find guidance on the conference cloud. For the third and last part, we invited you to present your research results on urbanity in the form of case studies. For this, we have asked you to also consider small towns or manifestations of urbanity outside of cities. And so we are happy to be whisked away to the Macedonian cities, the urbes non magnae, the small towns, for instance, with Marlies Arnhold's contribution. But presumably Jörg Oberste's Merovingian Paris was not yet a large city at that time either. Nor was it Angoulême in the 16th century, despite all the attempts made by their inhabitants and mayors. In a total of 14 short contributions, which we have called lightning talks, and this is referring as much to the impact as well as, I might remind you, their length, we can ask questions about the construction and performance of urbanity, about city branding and image building, about contemporary terminologies, taxonomies, and temporalities, what we call the triple T, terminologies, taxonomies, temporality, or about atmospheres, attitudes, and aspirations, they call the triple A. Not to forget, it is always about the religious and how it was interwoven with the urban, how it contributed to the formation of urbanity and thus of the city. Let me conclude before we all get into real work to announce some changes and additions to the program. Sad news first. Shail Mayram cannot come because of an accident and a broken arm. Yet there are also good news. We're happy to have guests in the hall, Frederick Vandenberge, the current distinguished fellow of the Max Weber Kolleg, Heiner Stahl, who I haven't seen so far. No, okay, will arrive tomorrow, and who has done research on sounds and noise in cities. So this is bringing an aspect that we haven't been engaging with so much. And he's also a member of the Erfurt Research Group on spatial temporality. And Constanze Schaller, who I have seen, a PhD student of Erfurt University, who will be here on Wednesday. So I have only seen her name. No, I have seen her. Yeah, there she is. Welcome. Finally, we would like to thank 3 people, 3 women in particular, who have been especially involved in the preparation of the conference, and you will recognize their names. It's Sara Keller, it is Clara O'Reilly, and person who is not present right now, Valeria Wahl, who is doing background work in the Max Weber Center. You were in contact with all of them during the preparation, but thanks to them, we can be here in Ettersburg Castle. But also important for the conference are Lukas Damm, the cameraman, and Ragat Al-Rosan, who has been in the welcome service, who both will take care on the film and photo business, the one with the stills and the other one with the films. And now we should really begin.